Okay, good morning, everybody. As you're coming on, I am excited to be here at the CrabCon Virtual Convention 2022. I had no idea that there was this much information on hermit crabs. And so, if you have questions about hermit crabs, this is about as close to a hermit crab as I actually have been, except with my adventures with my first book, which was in the ocean. So I am not the person you want to ask about hermit crabs if you need that kind of information. I wrote this book as means for children's entertainment. I live in Martinsville, Virginia. I grew up in North Carolina. I studied dance as my profession and taught with my husband for 43 years in a dance studio. So, kind of, hermit crabs was not on my radar screen. I actually had an experience with a real hermit crab in his natural environment in, I think it's 1982. Yeah, you heard that right, 1982. And when I came home from that experience with interacting with a real hermit crab in his natural environment, I decided that I really needed to write it down so that I would remember it. And then I decided, since I work with children, that I would kind of make it fairy tale like, and so decided to write it in a rhyming fairy tale kind of atmosphere. And so I did. And then back in 1982, which sounds a million years ago to some of you that are so young, like Cody, um, we didn't have all this immediate ability to publish things and get things out. So I just put it in a drawer, and years would go by and I'd maybe clean out a drawer and I'd come across it and I'd say, this is a really cute story. I need to do something with it. And then I didn't, and I put it up. So fast forward 43 years, I lost my husband, got out of the dance studio that we had established, one in North Carolina and one in Virginia. And we also ran a national dance competition organization across the country for many, many years called Dance Troupe Incorporated. So when he passed, I did get out of both of those businesses, and that left me retired and a need to be creative. So I pulled Herman back out, and I'm through a mutual friend that I had met, Donna Lawrence. She introduced me to Paws and Claws Publishing. And that's where I met Jennifer Tipton Capone, who is the owner of Paws and Claws Publishing, and her editor, who is a super editor, and I think you're going to hear from her later, Lynn Coble. So that's kind of how my Herman the Hermit Crab got born. Not like a lot of you crab enthusiasts out there that actually breed them. This is born out of an imagination and an actual experience at Oak Island, North Carolina. So I would love to read it to you. And like Cody said, if you have any questions that you want to ask me, I'll be glad to answer them at the end of reading this. And this is a very short book. But if you are like 12 years or older and you're tuning in and listening, I'm going to read it to you as if you were 12 and under. So I hope you enjoy it. It's Herman the Hermit Crab by Cindy W. Hollingsworth, and illustrated by Jennifer Tipton Capone, and the editing was done, as I said, by Lynn Coble. So they have really helped me all along the way with my 11 books, and I'm excited to read it to you. I'm going to start with the foreword that's in the book, as it kind of lays the background of how the story came to be. So this is my thank you to days gone by. A special thank you to my friend Ann Nichols, who joined me on many seashell hunts on Oak Island, North Carolina in our earlier years. We had so much fun chasing the tides as they came in and out, and deposited many treasures on the sands. We ran to see each new resulting exhibit and grab up as many shells that were left behind as we could, and we would squeal with joy when we found a large, huge conch or a beautiful sand dollar or an intact starfish. Those were indeed wonderful days by the shore, as my northern bred friend called our southern beaches. Did you know that if you're from the north, you call beaches the shore? And if you're from the south, we call them beaches, and so on and so forth. But anyway, it was the shore. Yes, the shore brought many great memories, days of relaxing, meals of fresh catches, and nights lulled to sleep by the ocean breeze and the crashing of the waves of the Atlantic in the distance. Though those times are now gone and we no longer chase the tides, little Herman was born out of one of those trips. This story is true. Herman did indeed exist, and he was bare, except for a tiny little dot at the end of his tail that I assumed was a shell. Now, you people that know so much about hermit crabs will probably think, this lady's crazy. That wasn't a shell. But yes, and so he did exist, and he was bare. And yes, he did accept my gift of a new shell home. It was a most unforgettable day at the shore. I wrote Herman's story shortly thereafter. I'm so glad to have this story come to life in print for many to read and experience, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed living it. God's blessings are everywhere. Sometimes we just have to bend down to see them. And so that was the intro to my book. And so I'll begin the story. And remember, we are now going back in time if we're over 12 years of age. Once upon a time, on a visit to a sea, I found a little hermit crab, as cute as he could be. This funny little creature in the waters near the sand crawled among some tiny seashells, which I'd reached for with my hand. And here's some illustrations of my hand and the little hermit crabs out doing their whatever they do in the ocean. And at that time, I really wasn't sure what hermit crabs did. As I bent to catch the spirals, shifting slowly with the tide, my fingers felt some tiny legs that came from deep inside. Wasn't expecting anybody to be home in that shell. Like many of us when we pick up shells on the beach, we're not expecting the person to still be home. Then suddenly I realized that in those little shells were other tiny hermit crabs, alive and doing well. And Jennifer's once again done a really pretty layout of a bunch of hermit crabs in their shells walking along the beach. The crab, whom I called Herman, had no shell upon his back, but he seemed to be a member of that seaside traveling pack. Here's Herman. I call him my naked Herman. And I thought Jennifer did a great job of illustrating naked Herman. And I suppose many of you out there in CrabCon land have seen lots of naked Hermans. I watched with much amusement as the shells walked to and fro, and right behind came Herman, all bare from head to toe. I don't know whether you can see all this, but here's little Herman. All his friends have their pretty shells, and poor old Herm, he doesn't have any. But wait, I think I see it. A tiny little shell, a small and teeny tiny dot at the end of Herman's tail. Well, this is true. I laughed and laughed and I laughed and laughed. Oh, poor Herman's gotten fat. At least I knew he'd grown too much for the shell that was on his back. But then I stopped my laughing and a sadness filled my heart for my funny little sea crab friend who was missing such a part. I thought, I know, I'll help him. I'll find an empty shell, a large and spiraled pretty one, in which old Herm can dwell. I fingered through the seaweed, the sand, and the salty foam until I found an empty shell, just right for Herman's home. And what a pretty shell it was. Lynn made it exquisitely pretty for Herman. Jennifer, excuse me, Lynn. I put it down behind him. He did not move a bit. And silently I wondered if the shell on Herm would fit. And, I don't know exactly how hermit crabs determine which home works, but I got to watch him in action. But he had ways of knowing that I guess I could not see, because while I bent and stared at him, he just stared back at me. "Oh, come on, Herm," I said aloud. "You could give the shell a try. You need a home like all your friends to keep you safe and dry. Here's Herman. I'm staring at him. He's staring at me, and we're getting nowhere." No sooner had I said that when he backed up to the shell, and he seemed to check the inside out with his tiny little tail. He stopped and sat really quiet, his black eyes still on me, his leggy little body still outside and in the sea. Got his tail inside the shell. Then whoosh! He did a rolling flip. I gave a happy yell, because when he flipped back over, he was safe inside my shell. I mean, I was amazed. It just went whap, and he was in that shell. Unbelievable. I love to hunt for seashells when I go to the beach. I pick up all the pretty ones that lie within my reach. But every time I find a shell, I wonder in my mind, what tiny creature lived in there, his home now left behind? Then I think of Herman with his seaside traveling pack, and I reach into my shell bag and I throw a small one back. And that is the end of the story. And if I were talking to the little children, I'd say, why do you think I felt like I needed to throw that shell back? So that I didn't take all of the shells, and that I left some for some other hermit crabs that might be just like Herman. So that's my story. I'm really excited that it was my first book that was published. And I want you to know that it's available on Amazon and also Barnes & Noble, or you can Facebook me, private message me, and I would be delighted to try to get one to you. They make perfect gifts for your grandchildren, your children, nieces and nephews, or friends that are hermit crab enthusiasts, or children that actually have a hermit crab as a pet. So this makes a wonderful gift. Christmas, birthdays, going to the beach, vacation, packed in a little sand bucket. The children love to read it. So I hope you enjoyed the story. And I do have another session, I think at 2:30, where I'm reading Herman the Hermit Crab, A Real Dilemma. And this also is a true story. Of course, it involves fishing and the fishing gear, hence the name, A Real Dilemma. But we'll go into this one at, I think it's 2:30. I will tell you that the closest I've gotten to being actually in close proximity to a hermit crab, is available on Amazon. But I know, as I watched yesterday in the presentations, there are all kinds of expos with amazing hermit crab paraphernalia, merchandise, beautiful art design. So yeah, you need to explore all of that. And as I said earlier, I am just thoroughly amazed with the number of people here on the convention and the marvelous amount of information that's available to all the attendees. It's just been an amazing event for me to even comprehend or understand. So congratulations to all of you out there working with these hermit crabs and making a better place for them in our world. And so that's it from me, unless you have questions or anything that you'd like to know. I'll be glad to answer them. Hi, Dakota. It's my pleasure to be back with you this afternoon. I don't know whether you were with me this morning at the 9:30 session when I read Hermit the Hermit Crab. This was my very first published book with Paws and Claws Publishing, and my very first published book for that matter at all. and it is continuing to be a favorite. Some 9 or 10 years later, it's been out that long. So if you didn't get to hear that this morning, maybe you can check it out at Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble, or you can message me and I'll be glad to talk with you about it. I am Cindy Hollingsworth. I live in Martinsville, Virginia, in a little town right across the North Carolina line. I grew up in North Carolina, went to school at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro, studied dance as a performing arts, and have been dancing since I was 3 years old. And I won't tell you how long that is, but it's a long time. Anyway, I met my husband when I was a sophomore in college. He was opening a dance studio in High Point, North Carolina. He had just returned from the armed services, where he had served 2 tours of duty. He fought in the Korean War. And anyway, he was an entertainer. He worked with the Rolling Along shows, and he was quite the local talent and a very good entertainer and dancer. And I wanted to take dance lessons from him. So I went there, and obviously I was starstruck and met him, and we ended up being Mr. and Mrs. and spent 43 years together teaching dance to young people and young adults, producing dance seminars and conventions across the country. We established 2 dance studios, one here in Virginia and one in North Carolina. And I did that until he passed away 14 years ago. And 2 years after his passing, I turned that over to a younger generation of people. And in 2 years following that, I turned over our national touring seminar and dance convention company to another set of younger people to carry on our tradition and legacy. So that left me retired, and I am a very creative person and love to produce and create things within the arts. I enjoy painting. I've done theater, acting, and just since I retired, by the way, I didn't do it before I retired. And then I started my writing for children, and I love that. And I was blessed to meet Jennifer Tipton Capone, who owns Paws and Claws Publishing, and her editor, Lynn Coble, who is a wonderful person, both of them to work with. So needless to say, I know about this much about hermit crabs, although I have learned quite a bit in the last few days, just seeing what all kinds of information is out there. And kudos to Mary Akers for this wonderful assembly of people to bring that information to the community and around the world. I had no idea there was so much to know about a hermit crab, but I am glad that you guys are here to present that information to the people that are hermit crab enthusiasts. So thank you very much, Mary, and your crew, and Cody for having me. It's been a real joy. And Stacy, she helped me get my shirt. Woohoo! CrabCon, I love this. So anyway, thanks to all of you for making me feel welcome. And yeah, if you haven't visited the expos and all the wonderful shops, oh my goodness, they have some amazing creative art things. So yeah, it's just been a marvelous convention. And thank you so much once again for having me. This is, it was actually my 4th book, The Hermit Crab, A Real Dilemma. And it came to me by way of a friend who was at the beach. And he called me up from the beach one morning and he said, Cindy, I caught your hermit crab. I caught Herman. And I said, what? He said, yeah, I was out fishing. He said, but don't worry. I didn't harm him. He's back where he belongs. I put him back. But I just wanted you to know that I caught Herman. So I didn't think a whole lot about it after we had talked about his times at the beach. I hung up the phone, and I think maybe later that day or that night, that little light bulb came on in my head, and I was like, whoa, you know what? That might be a really cute children's story as well as a follow-up to my first Herman the Hermit Crab book. So that's kind of how this Herman was born, or this book about Herman. And it's a little bit of a longer read and a little bit older kind of feel to it. And it's actually a story that is about Mr. G, the fisherman, which gave me a new character, and Herman and their interaction. So I'd like, once again, if you'll indulge me to read the foreword that goes with the book, and then I'll read the story to you. Once again, I've been called to revisit the beauty and mystical energy of Long Beach, North Carolina, now known as Oak Island. But no matter the name, the beauty of this beach strand continues to attract, yes, draw thousands of people to its shore each year. It was there that I first met Herman, and it was there that his story unfolded before my very eyes. Now, almost 30 years later, a good friend who often visited Long Beach with my husband and me way back in the 80s brought me a story of his fishing trip and his encounter with Herman. Though I doubt it's the same Herman, to my way of thinking, it is. The universe has once again dropped a delightful tale of adventure with my seaside friend into my mind, and it's one that I was called to write about. It's an adventure somewhat true and somewhat enhanced, but nonetheless filled with the beauty of Long Beach shores and the wonderful beach that resonates so strongly in my heart and the heart of my friend, Mr. G. Mr. G's love of Long Beach, his immense joy in fishing, even when there are no fish, and his fascination with seashells that wash onto the shore and onto what we lovingly call the point, all began back in the early days when a group of young couples, the 30-somethings, spent many happy days and vacations there together. Though those days are long gone, and some of the people who relished their times are also gone at the cottage known as Brothers Two, the tales are still told of the old days and the good times that we shared. I thank Mr. G for keeping those times fresh in my mind, and I thank him for knowing that the little hermit crab that somehow got caught up in his fishing line at his last fishing trip to Long Beach was a story that I would treasure. It was several days after the retelling of how he caught my Herman as his only catch of the day that light bulb went off in my head, and yes, Herman the hermit crab, a real dilemma, was conceived, along with a great new character, Mr. G, the old rugged fisherman who fondly gives us a beautiful look at the shores of a beach that he so dearly loves. Thank you, Mr. G, for letting us see and feel Long Beach through your eyes. And actually, I think you can see a picture of my friend, Mr. G. Herman the hermit crab, a real dilemma. Mr. G loved the beach, the sand and the surf, the sunrises and sunsets that were there as a perk. The ocean waves rushing in and out to the shore made the salt air and breezes that he loved so much more. But the one thing Mr. G loved most to do was to set up his fishing gear by the ocean so blue. He loved catching a fish and watching his rod as the surf tugged and pulled, making it bob. And once again, Jennifer's done a beautiful job of illustrating Mr. G's fishing gear. See that? Sometimes that bob would say, yes, there's a fish, but more often than not, it was merely a wish. But wishes or fishes, the beach was the place that Mr. G loved for its calm and its grace. It is a calming thing to sit by the shore and fish if you like to fish. He liked to go walking, enjoying the view, the ocean, the sky. It all made him feel like brand new. The breeze blowing by him seemed to whisper and say, any day at the beach is always a great day. He looked for some seashells that were scattered about by the tide's white water flowing in and swirling out. The puffs of white foam left stretched out on the sand sometimes hid those shells from the reach of his hand. At other times he was lucky with the shells he would find, but mostly the hunt was what quieted his mind. As the sun stretched and yawned, rising up, breaking day, Mr. G thought of fishing like children think of play. With yucky old worms and minnows in tow, he headed to the ocean and the waters below. A great day for fishing was Mr. G's thought as he set up his rig in just the right spot. And here's Mr. G. Here's yucky old worms. I don't know if you've ever been fishing with bloodworms at the beach, but they are really yucky, really yucky. For Herman, the hermit crab, It was an ordinary day. He was splashing in the waves that kept coming his way. He'd rolled with the tide and tumbled about, but another wave came, almost washing him out. And here's my lovely Herman out doing his thing, and then, well, kind of the sea got a little rougher and he was getting tossed about. The soft, squishy sand covered parts of his shell as he tucked deep inside in his home where he dwelled. The sea seemed to roar, getting louder this day, and the once gentle waves got much rougher and gray. And we can see that the storm is brewing and coming in, making the undertow and the waves a little harder to navigate for our Herman. The tiny sea crabs tossed and rolled all about. They passed jellyfish and minnows, globby seaweed and sea trout. Suddenly, Herman felt a tug on his shell. The thought crossed his mind, this might not end well. And our Herman is in trouble. In trouble, he has been caught in the fishing line, although I don't think he knows it. Mr. G saw his rod bend over, then back. It looked as though the thin pole would most certainly snap. He jumped to his feet from his chair in the sand. He reached for the pole, grabbing it tightly with his hand. Surely this must be a really big fish, or is it just another part of this old man's wish? I don't know if you've ever been fishing, but when the tide goes out, it'll make your bobber go up and down, and you kind of have to go with it. But sometimes that pull of the ocean makes you think, wow, I've got a really big fish on the end of my line, when in reality, that's not the case. Anyway, he reeled and turned and drew the line in. Then he'd give it some slack before trying again. The top of his pole bent low toward the sand as Mr. G spun the reel held tightly in his hand. Tugging and pulling, rolling to and fro, surely this fish wasn't going to let go. He's really trying to bring that big fish in, and we all know it's poor Herman. In the meantime, poor Herman had lost all control as he felt his shell home tossed and tumbled below. Mr. G spun the reel and held the pole steady with thoughts of a fish dinner that soon would be ready. He's in for a big surprise. Herman briefly peeked out from his shell deep inside, what he thought was causing this scary ride. Then the sunlight broke through, sand spewed in his face, and he was yanked and dragged to an abrupt stopping place. Poor old Herman, he got himself in quite the mess. Herman's tiny black eyes peered out from his shell, and his battered little body wasn't feeling so well. He lay on his back, his legs overhead, as a large, dark shadow brought a feeling of dread. And Jennifer's done such a great job. I don't know whether you can see this or not. Can you see Mr. G's shadow over top of little Herman? Big person looking down. Mr. G looked down, shaking his head in dismay. Ha! Well, this is some catch, I just have to say. He laughed at the shell with the crab that he'd caught. Just a lot of work for nothing, seemed to be his first thought. He picked Herman up, took off the sharp hook and line, placed him back right side up, thinking the crab would be fine. And aren't we glad that Mr. G is a humane person and didn't just grab him and toss him away, that he cared about the crab. But even his best plans to help weren't that neat, 'cause Herman flopped back over in an upside-down heap. Poor Herman was dizzy, his head in a daze from the tossing and tumbling in those rough, churning waves. Mr. G picked him up, rubbed some sand off his back, and then placed Herman down again to get him on track. But Herman flipped over and thought, is this up or is it down? Then he figured it out when his legs felt no ground. With a flick of his fingers, Mr. G tried again to help upright Herman and put him back on the mend. Finally on his legs, Herman looked all about. Then he headed straight for that ocean, more sure of his route. Mr. G watched the crab heading down to the sea and smiled at the story of this fishing spree. Goes Herman back to his home in the ocean. All better. Herman was safely tucked back in his shell, reunited with his friends who were glad he was well. Let's see. Here we have Herman's friends again. Mr. G settled back, having baited his hook. He dreamed of the fish he would soon catch and cook. As he looked at the sea with the waves coming in, it made his heart happy all over again. The tiny sea crab, his big catch of the day, reminded Mr. G that life doesn't always go your way. But even through mistakes or things you don't plan, you can still turn your wishes into fishes in your pan. And that is the end of The Real Dilemma. And that just tells us that sometimes when we are experiencing rough times, if we just stick with it and have a little bit of faith and hope, that eventually those bad times can turn around and become blessings to us all. And I hope that that's what the book relays, and that you enjoyed the interaction of Mr. G and the hermit crab and showing compassion and humanity for the tiniest of God's creatures on earth. So thank you.
I think Lynn might come in and join us for questions. If people have like publishing questions, editing questions, or questions about pause and clause themselves, sure, Lynn will probably be happy to help. If you have questions about the book itself or comments for Cindy, you can also type those out. We'll be here for a bit. Okay.
Yes.
And Lynn is with us.
Yes, ma'am. I'm here.
She's probably only heard that story a gazillion times.
Only a gazillion. I love the wording every time I hear it, Cindy. You reminded me of wording that caught my heart from the beginning. I love your wishes or fishes.
Yeah, wishes, fishes in your pan.
That's wonderful wording.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just remind people that I have a website, www.cindyhollingsworth.com, which has all of my books on it and the descriptions. I don't think this last bookmark has Thomas Stewart Town Cat, which is about a rescue cat that lives in Stewart, Virginia. And I don't think Tommy's Trains is on this one. But other than that, I have these lovely bookmarkers that Jennifer designed as well, that I usually send out when people order my books from me.
Perfect.
One thing, excuse me, Cindy, one of the things that Jennifer did in the artwork on this book was to make sure to show a lot of different kinds of shells and all the different ways that the hermit crabs could look to show that they're not all exactly alike, and the feel for the ocean. And she did that same thing on the plants too. So that's another neat thing to look at in the artwork on the book.
I don't know that I said in the beginning this morning that when I had written the first Hermit, I did not think it would be able to be published, because I did not think anybody could create an illustration of a hermit crab that was a lovable character. And I may have said that. But I remember my first meeting with Jennifer, and I prayed all the way going down there because I had not seen her rendering of Herman. And I was like, Lord Jesus, please let me like this hermit crab, because I knew if I didn't like the way he looked, that we could not publish the book. And that I wanted the children to be able to have a good feeling about looking at that hermit crab and also finding him cute and adorable. And I can remember when she handed me the sheet of paper with the first rendering of Herman, and I was like, oh my goodness, he is so cute. He is so adorable, and from that moment on, we had Herman the way we needed him to be. So I'm just sharing that with your audience, and
there have been a couple questions in the chat. So how did Paws and Claws get started? It's actually one of Mary Akers' questions.
Paws and Claws actually started about 11 years ago. Jennifer Tipton-Capolan is the owner, the founder of the company, the publisher. She is the book layout designer. She is the artist, and she's the web guru. And Jennifer started Paws and Claws Publishing LLC because Donna Smith Lawrence wanted to publish a chapter book about her and her dog, Susie. Susie is the inspiration for Susie's Law in North Carolina. Donna and Susie also have a nonprofit called Susie's Hope Nonprofit that they go out and teach children how to be good, responsible pet owners, how to be animal rights advocates, and how to be safe in unfamiliar dog situations. The 3 of the 4 first books Paws and Claws Publishing published were Donna's books. She first published the chapter book. The chapter book was made into a movie called Susie's Hope that is about their stories. And at the end of Susie's Hope, Paws and Claws Publishing appears in the credits at the very end of the movie. Our fourth of our first 4 books is a book about international adoption. That's a lovely book about how international adoption works and the steps of it. And then we followed it with Siv Ashley's first book about being a survivor of Khmer Rouge children's work camps in Cambodia for 4 years, which was a dramatic turnaround from anything we'd published to that point. Siv has since done a second book. So that was the start. Jennifer and I have now published 46 books. As soon as the new one I'll be reading in my next session by Charlene C. comes out, it will be number 47. Book number 48 is on Jennifer's desk. It's by Cameron Pendergraft. It's a story about a dog that died. And book 49 has gone through original edits. Book 50 has started original edits. So we're rolling. We're rolling. We have a lot of books in the works. It's a super exciting time. We have some new authors. We have our great authors like Cindy and Cameron, who've published multiple books. A couple of our other authors, Heather Rossell Irwin has written another book. Hattie Whitland-Lager has just told me she's writing another book. So we have books coming from people who are familiar to Paws and Claws Publishing followers and from brand new people. And some are adult books, some are children's books. We're going to take on a fantasy adventure chapter book for Middle Ages kids. It's a brand new genre. We've never gone in, and the book is fabulous. So we've got some really exciting things coming, and more on the way, and hopefully lots more books from Cindy. I don't know, Cindy, the way these people are talking, they want to see another Herman book.
And I'm hearing that about Thomas Stewart as well. So I mean, I've got some work to do right now with the mermaid.
I'd love for you to write another Thomas Stewart Town Cat book. That would be awesome. Maybe you could expand more on his family.
Anyway, do we have any more questions that we need to address? Herman.
I don't see any more questions in the chat unless anyone has anything else that they're thinking. So there will be a quick break from Lynn and Cindy now. However, the other session that's going on right now is Caution, That New Hermit Crab May Steal Your Heart with Trisha Landers from Just Two Old Crabs on the other stage. Sorry, I just had to double check that I was right. And then we do have the new food list starting at 3:30, as well as Lynn will be reading from Charlene's book, which is a rhyming chapter book for young children as well, I believe.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
And that one will be super fun. So if you do have kids, that one will be great for kids again.
Right.
You're welcome, Mary. Saves you having to type it out.
Could I say
So-
one more thing to promote
Yeah, of
Cindy
course.
really quickly? Cindy has published 11 books with Paws and Claws. She has her 2 Herman the Hermit Crab books. She has 2 West Details books about her beautiful West Highland White Terriers. She has a great Christmas book about a Christmas tree that never thought it would be purchased from the lot. She has Thomas Stewart Town Cat, that is a nonfiction book about a cat that was adopted by a whole town. She has 3 dance books. She has a great book about a boy who loves trains and everything about trains. So Cindy has a wide variety. Every book is wonderful. They're great to read for a child to read or to read aloud to. They're wonderful. They're charming. They're all different. Each one has a different take. So I highly recommend checking her out. You can see her books on pawsandclawspublishing.com. There's a separate page for each book. You can download sample pages and see what it's like. But hers are
you
really
also-
good.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Sorry, Lynn.
That's
I hate to cut you off. You were also saying that there is free coloring pages available for kids on the
There
website as
are.
well for the books.
There are free coloring pages available for kids. I think they're available on all her books, but they may not be available on the Thomas book. Cindy, do
Okay,
you know
fair
for
enough.
sure? I don't think.
There are no coloring pages on the Thomas book. I don't even know that about Tommy's trains and
Okay.
Teddy for Freddie.
Okay.
I don't know
Okay.
about the recent ones.
But most of her books, yes, there are 3 downloadable free coloring pages. You're welcome to run off multiple copies, give them to neighbor kids if you're going to read it aloud to a group of kids. They're lovely, and they are the characters in the story. Jennifer has stripped out the color, and they're nice coloring pages. And if you want, you could have kids do a little coloring competition for fun, or just decorate your walls with Cindy's coloring books. So that's another fun way to follow her book. Anna's Ballet Costume. Do I have the title right, Cindy? Anna's Ballet Costume?
It is Anna's Ballet Costume.
Yeah. Is a wonderful book if you know anyone who has a little girl who's going to have a recital. It's a great book for somebody going through a recital. Anna is a little girl who can't wait to get her new ballet costume for her recital. And it's lovely. And Cindy wrote the little tune that goes through the whole book. So she's a very talented woman.
So I'll have to write a book with a hermit crab as a dancer. How would that be?
There you go.
Ooh.
So we can stay in
Then we got to get a dancing shell. You got to have like a disco ball shell. Get some real cool stuff in there. Make it nice and
Herman the
colorful
Hermit
for
Crab.
Dakota.
Herman the Hermit Crab and his friends boogie on the beach.
There you go. We got it. We got a book idea, guys.
There you go,
For
Cindy.
next year's CrabCon. Look
you
out
got
for
it.
Herman and his friends dancing.
You've got a new choreography to do, Cindy, and people will have to rent the Hermit Crab costumes.
I'll have to do some more studying, guys. I don't know that much about crabs and dancing, so we'll work. All right. Well, I guess we need to let you get off and get ready for what's coming on. Please know that I really appreciate all of you so much, and God bless, and we'll go from there. Anybody that needs to contact me, please feel free to private message me on my Facebook Messenger. That'd be great.
All right. Perfect. Thanks so much, Cindy. It was a pleasure working with you.
I hope we'll talk more, Cody.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course.
Bye,
Thank
Lynn.
you,
See you in the next session. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Love
Bye.
your reading.